What's up, everyone? Welcome to the very first episode of the Beyond Terrain podcast. I'm your host, Leo Dalton. Today, we're going to have an in-house episode, just myself, where I'm going to present a little bit about myself, my journey thus far, and the podcast in general. We're going to go over some of the topics that are central to my thinking and therefore the show as well. So, without further ado, let's get into this episode. So, on the agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about why I wanted to start a podcast, some of the major topics to be covered. My story, some sources that helped me kind of get to where I'm at now, central concepts to the show. We're going to touch a little bit on the study of philosophy and alchemy or true science. We're going to talk about state of modern science. We'll talk a little bit about disease, what it is, what it isn't, as well as we'll touch on the role of the body and the psyche as well. So, why did I want to start a podcast? There's a lot of reasons. And we'll get into them more, I think, as the show goes on as well. But one of the things you know, I really wanted to produce something. I really wanted to help move this terrain model forward, right? Um, and so basically, I feel like it's my contribution, partly. I also think it's great for where I'm at in life right now. Start a podcast. I just think I'll be able to connect with a lot of like-minded individuals. I'll be able to learn a lot, right? Because it's not going to be really centered around my thinking. It's going to be centered around the people that we have on. And obviously, I get to share with all the listeners. The first couple podcasts are going to be by myself, and it's kind of going to set a little bit of a foundation for the future episodes to come. Very centered around the terrain model of health and how our environment depicts our health. Our internal environment is a direct representation of the external environment, and so that's kind of foundational to this idea. And we're going to talk about how I got there. Um, you know, what I really want about from this podcast is I really want to sing about what we're for here and not necessarily what I'm against. So, although I'm going to be a little bit of a hypocrite here in the first few episodes where I'm going to be talking about germ theory and modern science and its fallacies therein, I really want to focus on moving forward and solutions, right? Like, I don't want to talk about everything that's bad in the world because that's just going to bring negative energy. And we don't want any of that around here. So, uh, although so it's important to mention, like, I am going to be a little bit of a hypocrite here in my first episodes where um but there is a certain amount of importance to that too, right? Because there's a certain amount of unlearning that needs to be done as well. So I do think that's important, and I certainly wouldn't have put the effort into making these podcasts, kind of compiling all my ideas, if I didn't think it was worth it. So we're going to do that, but this podcast is really, really going to focus on prevention, right? So fortunately, right now I'm blessed with good health, and I truly believe that the best medicine is prevention. Certainly not in the modern sense in their interventions, but in general, and living in accordance with nature and living a good, healthy mental, spiritual, physical life, is all contributes to good health and keeping that forever, right? As long as we live. Um, and so central to prevention is taking responsibility, right? So learning about the true models of health and the true models of mental health and everything therein, uh, we need to take responsibility for ourselves, right? There's no one else in the world that can save us or make us healthy or make us not mentally ill, right? It all begins within, right? So we're certainly going to focus on the responsibility aspect of things. Um, you know, and I do want to note that, this is not going to be the podcast that's going to take down the establishment. Like, to be honest, I could care less about what other people are doing, right? Like, um, live and let live. You know, I'm focused on what I'm doing. This is not here, like, I'm not here to put other people down for their ways of thinking. I certainly respect everyone else's ways of thinking, and if they want to live the life that they want to live, and they want to live in accordance to that and everything that encompasses, that's up to them, right? So you want to live a modern lifestyle, well, you'll likely need modern care. So and this is kind of where the prevention comes in, right? Because we certainly want to prevent getting modern diseases, so maybe we should prevent the new modern causes of disease. All right, let's move forward here. So the major topics that we're going to cover is moving the train model of health forward, or I like to say that we're moving it backwards to more ancestral knowledge because we've certainly had things figured out before. You know, you look at any tribe, they certainly did not have the diseases that we've had, so we've gone astray and we've gone a little too far in our ways, and you can see it in the West. With the disease that we have. It's plagued our nation. It's plagued the entire world, really. But certainly in the West, the chronic illness is a major issue. So, um, and prevention is just central to it. So that's a main focus here. I will stress that a lot. I will be coming back to prevention all the time because uh, yeah, it's central. Um, So, within this train model of health, we're really going to be focused on new frameworks, new paradigms, new biology, you know, new concepts uh, that are really old concepts, right? We figured that stuff out before. We know it, right? And one thing about the modern framework that is it really holds them back is that they need to understand everything. They need to understand the details of everything, and they cannot say that they don't understand something or they don't know something, right? So here we're not going to be ashamed to say that we don't know stuff. There's a lot that I don't know, and the more that I learn, the more that I realize I don't know. So um I'm no know-it-all, and I'm no expert per se. um I just really want to focus on learning and expanding my knowledge, and I think that's a great place to start, especially in your younger years, because knowledge is power, and it's never going to be more important than it is right now. Um, so really, within this, terrain model of health, we're going to be looking at new science, the new biology, um, you know, new models of our, our cells, our systems, our even our mental. Um, we're going to look at some ancestral knowledge. From around the world we could take from every single line of ancestral wisdom and integrate it into our lives. We're going to be looking at their medicine. We're going to be looking at psychology. Definitely going to focus on that a little bit because the psyche is kind of the mediator between the biological realm and the social realm, which do have very important roles in our lives. So we're certainly going to focus on that as well. Um, and the training model of health is very, very holistic, right? So we're really going to be, looking at everything, right? We're not gonna we're not gonna just take one part, look at that, and look at it by itself because it's useless. Everything's connected. We know that. It's a very obvious thing that everything's connected. You look at an ecosystem and take a take the frog out of the ecosystem and try and study the frog. Well, you know, is the frog going to behave naturally? I don't know. I don't know about that. Unless you can mimic its environment absolutely perfectly, which we can absolutely not do. Um, So yeah, within that, we're going to look at societal factors as well. Obviously, not through a social justice lens, because we're all about taking responsibility here. We're not about victimhood here. We really, really want to focus on responsibility. Uh, and to a certain extent, we're going to try and merge spirituality and science together, for lack of better words. But definitely open to talking a lot about that as well. Spirituality, definitely not the dogmatic ways of thinking in that either. We're certainly going to keep it open and true to nature. Um, and definitely want to touch on art, architecture, things like that, because that certainly affects our psyche, which in turn definitely affects our bodies. Um, and we're going to talk a little bit about philosophy too. I just find that interesting. It may not be the most useful thing to ponder on, but a little bit of philosophy never killed anybody, so we'll probably touch on that as well. Um, but yeah, so essential to the podcast again is just living well. We want to live well. We want to have top of the line health. We really want to optimize our health. And this is going to happen through the physical, mental, and spiritual planes. And so mentally we're gonna look at things. I like to look at things through the a king, warrior, magician, lover stance. Where a king is a provider. They're prosperous, right? They have their kingdom, they have high esteem, and this aspect is certainly important for young men, um and we'll touch on the feminine side of things. I'm not a female, so it's hard for me to talk for them. But hopefully we can get some people on to talk about that. But as for men, we'll certainly talk about this framework, this king, warrior, magician, lover. It's a Jungian concept. And so king, yeah, prosperity, warrior, of course, learning, knowing how to fight is not a unnatural thing. Being healthy is central to that and central to the warrior archetype. Um, being strong, being physically able. So the magician archetype would be knowledge, wisdom, mental constraint, power, discipline, things of that matter. And the lover, of course, family oriented, joy, pleasure, doing things you love, play, right? Raising children, animals, things of that nature. So I like to take that framework. It's certainly helped me in my life. And kind of structuring the way that I want to go about things. So this podcast is kind of fitting into my magician and king archetype, right? Because through this podcast, I've been learning more and more and more already, even just in the preliminary kind of making of it. And I'll only continue to learn as I have guests on and all that. And so I'm also producing something, right? So some would argue that maybe a podcast is not the most productive thing, um, and it's not an absurd argument, but it's a step in the right direction, right? So, we don't necessarily need to start with opening up a university to get knowledge out to people, right? So, although that might be a valuable goal down the road, we'll see. So within this living well idea, we're going to talk about other things as well, like farming. I'm big into the permaculture, biodynamic approach. We're going to talk about individual sovereignty, autonomy, self-reliance. Those are all central to being a good man and to being a good individual. We're going to talk about living naturally. Living in accordance with nature is just fundamental, right? And that's just fundamental to health, in my opinion. If we're disconnected with nature, you're disconnected from health, you're disconnected from everything, right? So that's going to be part of it as well. And we're going to talk a little bit of financial freedom. I would like to get into some more financial uh, talks with some people, and because in the modern world, there's a certain amount of modern living that we have to abide by. And now finding the line of living the more ancestral primal way of life to keep our health and our mental health stable. Um, we can certainly take that and translate it into a modern way of living prosperously, right? So through financial freedom, we can certainly gain back a lot of sovereignty that we wouldn't have if you're doing without, right? But you certainly don't want to gain financial freedom at the cost of your mental or physical or spiritual health, right? So it's about finding that balance, and I do want to talk about that on the show quite a bit because I think that's important. Because even eating healthy is very expensive. Some would argue it's not. I would argue if you don't have time to do a lot of the stuff yourself, it is. So we'll talk about that as well. And it fits into the king archetype, right? So you'll probably hear me reference that a lot. But yeah, and so again, here I have noted prevention is the best medicine, which it is. And there are many misconceptions of prevention. You know, prevention begins in the mind for sure. If you pigeonhole yourself with ideas and complexes that, you're diseased or you're anxious or you're this or you're that, right? That will manifest. So we'll certainly talk about that, our mental state as prevention, and of course, physical as prevention as well, right? Is avoiding animal foods the best prevention for avoiding heart disease. Well, not really. And we'll talk about that further. Um, so we'll certainly highlight a lot of these misconceptions in the podcast, and we'll talk about a lot of preventative measures that are true to nature. My rule of thumb is that if it's not natural, don't do it. But just because it's natural doesn't mean that it can't harm you. So that's kind of my rule of thumb there. So let's get into a little bit about my story. You know, this might be the more boring part for some people, so check the timestamps and you can skip past it. But I'm going to talk about a little bit how I got here. Um, growing up, like I went to a smaller school, same school for my entire life. I had a really tight-knit group of friends, which looking back was the absolute best thing that could have happened to me growing up because all my boys, they're right on. They're all like free thinkers. We were all for ourselves. We were all for the boys. Um, and they're brothers more so than friends. But we certainly fostered this sense of independence and growth, and even unity within a smaller friend group. Not necessarily unity in global ideas, right? So because that can get very dogmatic and you know but we were very about our own well-being, and we looked out for each other, right? So there's that balance of being really pragmatic with yourself, right? And being an individual, but there's also this notion that you need a certain amount of affiliative nature, of being around other people and helping them out because we are social beings for sure. That can't be denied. um, so yeah, went through school. Certainly didn't think that I was going to go to university. Had a change of heart and was financially driven and wanted to be a dental surgeon actually. So I went to school for biochemistry in my undergrad. Originally biology, but quickly switched out of that and thought biochemistry was more up my alley, which in a way it was certainly more than biology, but certainly has its shortfalls now looking back. And the biochemical classes that I took were largely centered around genetics, which was not the most interesting thing to me. I certainly wanted to learn more about metabolism, and I learned a little bit about it, but really not in the way that I wanted to learn. I certainly got more out of a lot of my electives than my science classes, because they're so riddled with dogma. It's not even funny. And we'll definitely be going over some of that in the future podcast here. So of course, in my university career, we got hit with the uh, big fiasco that many call the pandemic. Of course, we don't necessarily abide by that narrative here on this podcast. But I will say that I've never been so grateful for anything in my life because it certainly allowed me to open up my eyes and really allow me to unlearn a lot of things and relearn a more truthful way of living. It afforded me a lot of time to think, right? So I switched out of the not of biochemistry, but my route of going down into dentistry or being a dental surgeon. Um, so I'm forever grateful for that because I would certainly not be here. I would certainly not think the way I do if it weren't for that. So we can't have any regrets or anything like that. And it was hard times. It was the dark night of the soul. It was a tough road, but coming out on the other side was really beneficial. It was huge. It was definitely central to who I am now. So with that, like through that time, a lot of unlearning took place and a lot of relearning as well, right? So I did start to get into more ancestral ways of thinking, into more bioterrain models of health. It didn't take long really. Um, by March of 2020, I was already deep into Andrew Kaufman's work in the terrain model of health and his study on exosomes um and that man is really really a blessing to the world. But I did stumble upon um his works. I was actually just scouring the web and learning about the COVID, and uh, the virus, and originally looked at how it was a leak from a lab, right? And went down that rabbit hole a little bit, but then it led me to the truth. I stumbled upon a video, um, and I they were talking about how germs don't cause disease, and I went down into the comments and I wrote this big long paragraph of a comment about how germs cause disease and you don't know what you're talking about. And I study microbiology, and we know the mechanisms of viral entry and how bacteria cause disease, and we know their toxins and their endotoxins and all of this stuff. And the the maker of the video just responded with a link to another YouTube video, quotes refuting germ theory. And it was posted on Andrew Kaufman's channel, and that was an eye opener. I'll say that was an eye opener. And so, yeah, getting into Andrew Kaufman's work was really a blessing for me. Uh, his video "Rooster in the River of Rats" was great for highlighting how Koch's postulates have never been attained. He went over a bunch of papers and on why it's never been done, and the logical fallacies in the isolation processes. So that was really important. And then another really foundational um, guy was Tom Cohen. He's amazing as well. And I think Andrew Kaufman actually posted his work. I certainly learned of Tom Cohen through Andrew Kaufman, but Tom's video on a lesson on logic was amazing. I think he used the ping pong ball analogy to highlight how we've come to the idea that viruses cause disease, and the logical fallacies therein. And phenomenal video. I really urge people to check out those two top videos as a starting step for this idea. Um, and then really, it just started growing from there, right? Like every day I would wake up and like I would really try to disprove the idea of the terrain theory, and I would really try to prove the germ theory, right? Because I didn't necessarily want to change my way of thinking. I was already schooled a couple years and in higher education, and I thought, well, how could they be wrong? How could everybody be wrong? How could this idea be so incorrect and so popular at the same time, which is a logical fallacy in itself. But it was really snowballing from there, and the more I tried to prove the germ theory, the more I disproved it, and the more I tried to disprove the terrain model of health, the more I proved it. So really, it was just obvious, and it only takes a little bit of logic to really see through it. But the mental fortitude to be able to, you know, accept that what you've learned is wrong is the most important part, really, because you could be told the information, but if you're going to take it in and consider it truthfully and honestly, that's a different story, right? So that takes a lot of mental fortitude as well. Um, but yeah, continuing in the videos that really helped shape me. One was Hippocratic Hypocrisy by Andrew Kaufman and Spacebusters. That was absolutely phenomenal. Um, yeah, just highlighting the history of the germ theory, and how kind of modern systems have taken over. Another great one. We're going to go over a little bit about the history of germ theory in the next podcast. But that one was a very concise video. I'd highly recommend it. Another great one was The Culture of Scientific Misdirection by Thomas Woods Jr., again, posted on Dr. Andrew Kaufman's channel. Another phenomenal video just highlighting the fallacies and the studies that have been done on things like you know just modern ways of medicine, right? So uh, and you know getting into this thinking, I really wanted to dig deeper, and so I started getting some books, right? So initially I started with the videos, and then I really wanted to get into it, and so we got into my first book was Inventing the AIDS Virus by Peter Duesberg. That was absolutely phenomenal. Really highlighted for me the problems within the modern scientific community, right? And even just how people go about publishing things and the peer review process, and how science is more of a popularity contest and a political thing than anything. We've gotten really far away from true science, which is so problematic. There's so many vested interests and problems in it. Uh, Another really important book for me was More of Resonance by Rupert Sheldrake. And this was really, really an amazing book because he's a big merging spirituality or religion with science, um, and how they don't exist independently. And he highlighted a lot of issues with the current scientific field and their dogma and vested interests as well. So, like opening up my mind to the corruptness of the scientific community and scientific field was very important because, you don't necessarily think that, there's a benefit to having this information put out and this agenda and this, you know, these modern ideas put out. But it really does serve as a way to, well, it always all comes down to money, right? It always comes down to money. So, follow the money and you'll find the truth. But in continuing with the books that helped me get here, What Really Makes You Ill by Don Lester and David Parker. Just an amazing book, comprehensive book. Might be the best book to begin with. It's rather big and dense, so it might not be as well. I do have a reading list that I will provide here in the next upcoming slides. But What Really Makes You Ill, very comprehensive. When I initially read it, I skipped sections because I actually didn't want to believe the sections. Like I skipped the section on vaccines and I skipped the sections on like, things like antibiotics, right? Because I didn't necessarily want to believe that those were unhelpful and potentially dangerous or most definitely dangerous. Um, but yeah, so it certainly was a very important book. And going back after funny, like reading them like years later, I skipped them and didn't read them, right? So I was starting to kind of get into this. Well, it's obvious that germs and microbes don't cause disease, but I still didn't really want to accept fully what that entailed, right? But using logic, it's obvious what that does entail, if that is the truth. Um, and so a couple of podcasts that I got into, Alpha Vedic, Dr. Bale Lando is absolutely phenomenal. Fountain of Wisdom with Mike Winner, another great mind. Another great podcast is The Terrain Theory and Humanely podcast. I'd highly recommend checking those out as well. They're fantastic resources. And so here's the reading list that I would likely recommend to someone who kind of want to get into this. I always recommend Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by Weston A. Price. Just an absolutely amazing read. Studying the natives from around the world, right? Different groups of natives. I think there was over 10 different untouched native tribes where he compared the natives consuming a native diet and living a native way of life compared to the exact same native group living a modern way of life, consuming a modern diet, and showed the differences in their teeth, right? So cavity incidence went from 1 to 5% in the native groups to 30 to 60% in the modern consumption groups. So again, just an amazing read, and it kind of highlights the importance because he does touch on tuberculosis and how it was never seen, and this was a big disease at the time, how it was never seen in the natives consuming the native diet and living the native way of life, but it was always seen in the same native group consuming the modern way of life and diet. So the next book I'd recommend is The Moth and the Iron Lung by Forrest Moretti. This was another great book, beautiful read, really easy to read, kind of just highlighted the discrepancies in the way things flowed. It kind of goes over the history of polio, of course, on how it likely wasn't a little virus that caused all of these polio cases, but rather toxicities like Paris green, lead arsenate, and eventually DDT. Some claim the polio vaccine actually caused some. I wouldn't be surprised if that caused polio as well, but the cases of polio were certainly on the decline before the vaccine was rolled out. Um, Obviously, that is the story that's with every single vaccine that's ever been rolled out, cases are always on the decline, or it comes out and nothing changes, like influenza or COVID vaccine for that matter. The next book I'd recommend is The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Fitzenberg. This is an absolutely amazing read as well. It goes over the history of electricity and how it may be contributing to our ill health. Again, a very large, dense book, very, very informative. You certainly get your money's worth, and it's worth the read. the unnatural electric currents that we live in constantly, that I'm living in right now. I'm have the Wi-Fi turned on and a device in front of me that has, these electromagnetic frequencies. It's very hard to avoid, but it's important to navigate in this modern world. So I'd definitely recommend that. The next book, Inventing the AIDS Virus, kind of going over the whole uh, AIDS debacle and how that came about and the problems therein. Great read, fairly easy read, fairly large book, not too bad. Definitely worth your money. Um, you'll realize that AIDS is just the first round of COVID. So, great book, definitely needed in this time. Then I'd certainly recommend What Really Makes You Ill. Don Lester and David Parker, again, comprehensive book, kind of answers a lot of questions, a lot of fills in the blanks. It's a great book. Uh, and then number six, I'd definitely go with this a three-parter. I'd go with Dr. Cohen's books. They're absolutely amazing. He has one on water and cancer, one on vaccines and autoimmunity, and childhood illness. He wrote The Contagious Myth, a contagion myth in relation to the COVID fiasco, as well as Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. And this series kind of, they're very short, they're very easy, they're very well written. Dr. Cohen is an absolutely phenomenal author. And he really opens it up past the terrain theory, right? Because the terrain model of health is more than just this terrain theory, right? It really opens up the horizon to this new way of life, to this new biology, to these new old frameworks, right, of health. So he's amazing. He definitely does his due diligence. Dr. Tom Cohen, couldn't recommend him enough. Amazing. And then the extras I have here, flowing really well from Dr. Tom Cohen's series is The Fourth Phase of Water, Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life by Dr. Gerald Pollack. He is just an extravagant thinker, an extravagant writer as well. More textbook-like books, but absolutely amazing, especially if you want to understand, the role of water in the body and the new structure of cells, right, and the discrepancies in cellular biology. Another good book on electricity is The Body Electric by Dr. Robert O. Becker. Again, just an amazing book. Beginning with work on salamanders and the healing frequencies within their body, and how they heal that. And he goes into some stories about how he's healed with those frequencies. He's mimicked them using silver electrodes in humans. And the credibility I'm not 100% sure on, but it's phenomenal read regardless. Understanding understanding the electrical importance of the body is central, because really our bodies are electrical much more than they are biological or chemical, because at the basis, well, chemistry is electrical, and we've certainly got away from that idea. But next, I would recommend Morphic Resonance, a more abstract book, kind of new age. It kind of goes against the new age neo-Darwinism of evolution, talking about more of the relation to the collective unconscious, and it proposes a much more sound theory of evolution, certainly more in accordance with our timelines, whether you can believe them or not. But yeah, Rupert Sheldrake, amazing, amazing author. And then if you really want to dig deep, The Blood in its Third Element, Antoine Béchamp, really any of Antoine Béchamp's work, he's really the pioneer of this field. There's other authors you could get into that are really deep into this, Gunther Enderlein or Gaston Naissance. Really, there's a lot that you can get into, and we'll touch more on that in the third podcast, in talking more about the Turing model of health. Um, so now we're going to touch on a little bit of a few of the central concepts of this podcast, right? So, things that I've taken from the books and the things that I've read and listened to so far. The major central concept really, like, is the gel body, right? Um, and this kind of builds upon the fourth phase of water. So I'd really highly recommend Gerald Pollack's work in this, and Dr. Cohen thinks of it very well and speaks of it very well as well. And Gilbert Ling is another one who's amazing, and Harold Hillman are amazing for this new cell biology, and pointing out the fallacies of modern cell biology as well. And so this gel body, or crystal body, right, is is an interesting concept because, although our bodies are, 70% liquid by volume or 99%, 99.999% by molecular count, we are not water, we are not liquid. We act as a gel. If you feel your body or if you cut yourself, you don't leak water, right? It's gel-like. And so this kind of state that's between solid and liquid uh, allows for a lot of these cellular processes and actually highlights the process as well. And you know, I believe it's a central concept because really, like, getting back to the true health of our bodies and understanding the importance of the food that we eat, and not necessarily just it's not necessarily just macros, but it's energy, right? So it's electricity, it's nutrients, it's micronutrients, it's elements, right? We need to be consuming water, proper water, not city tap water with pesticides and pharmaceutical drugs and fluoride and chlorine and you name it, it's in there. It's full of crap. Spring water is obviously ideal, or water from, fruits or milk, raw milk, or, raw foods, like in general, like raw meat or anything of that, raw fruits, raw vegetables, that has true structured water, right? That has the true gel water, natural water. And our bodies produce natural water as well. So, as you metabolize it, it all comes down to the creation of water at the end of it. So, that's a rather important concept, the gel body. And we'll break that down further and its importance in the bioreturning model of health, mostly in the third podcast. So if that's out now, you can skip the second one, the boring history of the germ theory. No one cares about that anyways. It's stupid anyways. But no, it's rather important to learn about, at least slightly. Um, so the next central concept, the microcosm of the internal environment is a direct representation of the macrocosm. And this is an idea that's extremely old. Hippocrates talked about this. It's, written in code in the alchemical text. It's really logical. It just makes sense. If you live in a polluted environment, the inside of your body is going to be polluted. It really doesn't take too much to understand that. Go outside and go camping, you feel great. You know, live inside a skyrise downtown the city, you're gonna feel like crap. It's really, really simple, really easy to understand, really easy to understand. Um, Another central thing that we're gonna touch on a lot is the study of alchemy. Because really in these texts, we already understand the fundamental aspects of nature, the principle of mentalism, that being that we live in a mental universe, the principle of correspondence, as above, so below, which also the microcosm of the internal environment is a direct representation of the macrocosm, as above, so below, as above. And I guess in relation to the statement above, it would be um, as within, so without, as without, so within, right? Uh, the principle of vibration, that everything's constantly in motion, even though it seems like it may not be in motion, it certainly is in motion. The principle of polarity, that things exist in polar um, opposites. It's kind of more, if that's a very abstract concept, the principle of polarity, it's rather hard to explain using words because it's kind of something that can only be understood and less so explained, although many do very good jobs at explaining it, and we'll certainly touch on these concepts in more depth, but just to present them in brief for the purpose of this first introductory episode, we'll keep going here. The principle of rhythm, that things act on a pendulum, and I even like to think of this as the circular motion of things, right? Or the sine motion of things, that things kind of come up and down, up and down. Things aren't linear, right? In life, things are not linear. And then that's really what I get from this principle of rhythm. Of course, principle of cause and effect, that every effect has a cause. Things do not occur random. That is the biggest misconception, the biggest fallacy of the modern way of thinking, um, that things can occur randomly. It makes absolutely no sense. No sense at all. And the principle of gender, that everything has an ascribed gender, masculine or feminine energy. That's central to our study of the psyche, study of archetypes, things of that nature. And very helpful in nature as well, right? It's innate. It's within us. It's biological. It's grounded in nature. So, um, another central concept, and this is one that I teetered back and forth on so much, like an unbelievable amount. And I can't necessarily say that I'm 100% sure in this. I'm fairly sure in this because it kind of relies on the principle of cause and effect. But the dose does not depict poison. That's the worst statement I think that I've ever heard. Yeah, so you know what? I am sure about this. This is the worst statement I ever heard in my life. The dose depicts the gravity of the reaction, right? It's the law of cause and effect, the principle of cause and effect. You know, you give yourself a dose of mercury. Well, if you give yourself, 0.001 moles of mercury, you know, or you give yourself, the smallest minute amount. Think of the smallest amount of mercury that you could give yourself, and you put it in your body, right? Well, it's going to have the same effect, just on an extremely small scale. So it might not cause major symptoms. It might not cause presentable symptoms, but it's still going to cause an effect. It's still going to have an effect on the body, right? So whether you give the smallest amount of something of a toxin that you can give, it's still going to cause an effect. Now, you give the very large, dose, and you're going to have presentable symptoms that we can see. And that's why we think that the dose doesn't depict the poison, just because the lack of symptoms is not necessarily health, right? That's essential. That is a very, very essential statement, especially for this podcast. Just because you don't have visible symptoms doesn't mean that you're necessarily in optimal or perfect health. Now, if you lack symptoms and you live a good, happy, healthy life, well, then you're happy, you're healthy, whatever, that it's up for us to determine. We the people have the power, and we the people know ourselves the best. We are the experts of ourselves. So listen to yourself, definitely listen to yourself. You don't need to rely on other people to tell you how you feel or how you live, but when you listen to yourself, you have to be honest with yourself, and that's very difficult, very, very difficult. I'm no master of that. It's a very difficult thing to master. I don't know anybody that's a master of that. You know, Even Carl Jung's not a master of that. Maybe when he died, he was, but it's a very difficult thing because some may even argue that it's impossible if we get into the Jungian ideas of things. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. And another essential concept is that life is electrical and geometrical. Uh, you know, we are not a modern game of billiard balls of random chemical reactions and biological systems, right? Biology is supposed to be the study of nature. Well, we've kind of gotten away from that. Uh, and we've reduced the body a lot, especially to its chemical components, its biochemistry, right? I learned a lot about this in my undergrad. The idea that we are just randomly colliding chemical reactions, one, it makes no sense because, we're trillions and trillions and trillions of reactions per second, for it all to randomly occur and the movement of the chemicals therein, it just makes no sense, really. That reductionist idea is just flawed in its entirety. It's terrible. Um, so, we are electrical beings, we're spiritual beings, we're conscious beings, we're energetical beings, we are natural, we are nature. That's what we are. We are not a textbook, biological textbook. And that goes for even what I'm talking about now. Even when we get into Ling's and Hillman and Pollack's ideas of the new concept of the gel body and the new cellular ideas. Well, we're humans. No one argues with that. We're made up of a head, arms, legs. That's a Cohen idea right there. But, no one argues with that. You don't need to delve deeper. I'm delving deeper because it's important if we're going to try and create an argument for this way of life. For many people, they need to, even myself, I needed to understand this framework to kind of move myself forward within it, right? Many people can understand things. They can understand, okay, well, I'm a human being. I belong in nature. Simple. You're healthy. Do natural things. Easy, right? Some people need to know, oh, well, show me the scientific studies, da 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 da, and show me the theories and this and that. So, we're going to provide that. We're going to provide that. We're going to provide, the logical, easier sense to understand. Um, but sometimes it's not that easy. Another central concept is that correlation is not causation. And this was taught, I've been learning this for a very long time. and I rarely see it employed. Correlation is not causation. Renders most of the epidemiological field absolutely useless. We saw through COVID, nothing but correlation was causation, right? That was their mantra pretty much. It's just absolute ludicrous. Um, so anyways, the modern systems just certainly don't live by that. Um, but we will try our best, and because it is a very important concept, and we certainly don't want to make any claims that we can't back up. um the next one is the power of thought. We this is a principle of mentalism, alchemical notion again. Our thoughts depict our universe, our thoughts depict the reality. Every single physical thing was a sustained thought before it became into the physical realm. Everything that happens was a thought. So some good books on this: Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief, that's a fairly popular one. Your Invisible Power by Genevieve Behrend, another great book on the principle of mentalism. This has been talked about, Think and Grow Rich. It's manifestation essentially, right? It's been talked about for a very long time. Um, you know, there's also this notion of the effect of thought and emotion of water, right? So Veda Austin has done a lot of work in this area. She's phenomenal. Definitely check her work out. And Masaru Emoto um, was her teacher. And essentially that our thoughts can imprint geometrical structures on water, right? And this speaks to the structural properties of water and the fourth phase of it, but also speaks to the power of our thoughts, um, and emotions on water, and in general. And if our bodies are mostly water, well, you can put two and two together there. And obviously, the new age concept of neuroplasticity ties into this power of thought very well, right? Our environment depicts, you know, our genome and our neural networks. So, and what you think does as well, and what you do. So it's very important. Um, Definitely something that I really want to continue to do is stay open-minded. The last thing I want is to be overtaken by dogma. Anything that I talk about, certainly open to hear the other side. I actually seek out to learn about the other side of things quite a bit. I think that's really important. I'm open to pretty well any concept. I'm gonna have people on the show that I don't necessarily agree with. I think that's absolutely paramount. You know, there's no idea that I can't entertain. Um, and even I'd love to have people on to come on and try and refute the terrain model of health and back the germ theory. I cannot guarantee that anyone would be willing to do that, but I'm certainly going to search for it. Um, but yeah, we want to remain open-minded. If someone comes out with a perfectly sound, logical Koch's postulate study tomorrow, we're gonna have to reconsider this podcast. We might have to change the name. But but we definitely want to remain open-minded. We don't want to get stuck in dogma. I think that's really important for everybody in this earth, and I think that's something that everyone can learn from. And so it's something that I want to live by and employ, especially in this podcast. Um, we're gonna keep growth and abundance mindset here. Uh, there's no the myth, like scarcity is a myth. Nature provides. We can fish all the salmon, we can kill all the bison, we can we can screw over our environment as much as we can, but nature is resilient, and thus we are resilient. We're going to always keep this in mind. We're going to keep the growth mindset. Part of an open mind is the growth mindset. We're always going to be learning new things. We're always going to be pushing ourselves forward, learning, growing. King, warrior, magician, lover. We're just going to be getting better all the time. And I want everyone that listens to this podcast to do one thing, have the growth mindset, have that open mind. That's the important thing. And lastly, the responsibility mindset. You need to take responsibility for your actions, for what you do, for everything that happens in your life. You need to take responsibility. We are not a victim of society. We are not a victim of germs. We are not a victim of our genetics. We are not a victim of anything. Take responsibility for your life. That is extremely important. If you don't do that, well, you'll end up a victim, closed-minded, And guess what? You're not going to grow. You're going to shrink into nothingness. So keep that in mind. All right, next we're going to talk a little bit about alchemy. This is certainly not going to be comprehensive and likely will not even make a lot of sense, right? I'm no alchemical master. I'm certainly less than an adept. I'm an apprentice, if that. Uh, you know, I've I did take a course in university on alchemy, and it was rather good. And you know, um, but again, no expert here, and I want to have experts on to speak about alchemy because I think it's an extremely, extremely important topic. It's true science. It's life science, right? It's complete science. It's not materialist. Materialism is flawed. Quantum mechanics disproves materialism. Materialism makes no sense. It does not. Study quantum. If you are of the modern mind, study quantum mechanics. It has disproved materialism. The double slit experiment, everything. Materialism, we don't want anything to do with that, right? Alchemy merges this spiritual side of things, the energy within the consciousness and the matter, right? Because matter is just a manifestation of consciousness, right? We'll get into more of those concepts later. What alchemy is not, it's not the study of creating gold out of lead. That's a reductionist way of viewing alchemy. And a lot of people, you know, harp on alchemy as being that, and that being the central concept of alchemy. Well, if that's what you think alchemy is, you're no alchemist and you're no initiate. The central concept through this initiation is a breakdown of the prima materia into the prima materia, sorry, and merging into an incorruptible new, right? So the idea is you take this lead, right, this imprecious metal, and you boil it down not to liquid lead, but to the prime materia, to the energy itself, to the to the bare bones. And you know, with that, all you have is potential. It's pure chaos, right? It's pure potential. It is the building blocks of the universe, more than the physical realm. And through this merging, or through this breakdown, right, you get this incorruptible uh, base material. You can make anything. If it's pure potential, it just needs to be ordered, right? And this is Jordan Peterson talks about a lot about the creating order from chaos, right? That's central. It's simple, right? So you take the lead, you boil it down into the building blocks of the universe, and you create gold, this incorruptible order, this godly substance, right? Gold, sun. You know, the thing about alchemy is that it's written in code. It's not meant it can't be written literally. It can't be written literally because it tries to explain the laws of the universe, which is why it's written in story. The importance of story is within alchemy, within the study of alchemy. You need to open your mind up more than the material world. There's more than that. And so within alchemy, of course, the hermetic principles that we went over earlier, they're essential to the study of alchemy, and those are kind of the laws. Those are kind of the principles of reality. So that'll always be taken into consideration. Of course, it fits into pretty much anything that we could talk about. So we'll reference to it quite a bit. Um, Now, one thing that alchemy is it's the study of causality, of true causality, right? So looking at the cause and effect of things, it's one of its basic principles, right? Uh, so, and within this idea, matter follows energy. That's central, right? That's something that the reductionists, the material reductionists do not have. They do not have that matter follows energy, right? We say in mental illness, oh, well, you're depressed, you have a neurochemical imbalance. That's the modern view. Well, it's more likely that, you're depressed, your energy is off, and through neuroplasticity, your brain develops this neurochemical imbalance as an effect, cause being that your energy is off, that you live this depressing way of life. You live this modern, empty, meaningless way of life. And it's not as though the studies don't support that. The latest meta-analysis of the biological cause of depression proved that there was insufficient evidence to prove that, or to say that depression is caused by a neurochemical imbalance. So, out the window with that. Um, Matter follows energy, right? Our genetics follow our energy. Things are not genetically caused, right? You know, you provide yourself with an optimal amount of nutrients or energy. Well, our genes will adapt, right? Our genes are not the cause of disease. Certainly not. Matter follows energy, always. Fix your energy. That's very important. That's why getting back to nature is central to being healthy, right? If you have no energy, if you don't touch the ground with your bare feet, if you don't go out into a natural body of water and go for a swim or climb a tree or look at an animal or breathing fresh, clean air, right? Your energy is going to be off. And matter follows energy. It's so important. It's so central, right? Um, so this alchemy idea, it's a life science. It's the study of life. We're concerned with living things. In alchemy, the idea is not to kill things to study it. It's to observe things in its natural environment. Observe yourself in its natural environment, right? Um, so it's a life science, and uh, balance may not be central to alchemy per se. You could probably make an argument that it is, but balance is certainly central to this Turian model of health, and balance is not necessarily center. So we need to clear that up. If balance is ever referenced in this podcast, it does not mean the center of things. It does not mean two equally weighted things perfectly creating a balance, because um, that's not necessarily the case always. So balance, it could be 90-10% wise, right? Things balance off in ways that you often don't think. So something to consider. We're going to look at the modern science, uh, everyone's favorite. Uh, Modern science, more like a death science. We stopped observing things in the 1900s with the Flexner report, when they touted observation as being useless and being incomprehensive to scientific study, essentially stating that observation is not enough to produce results. So what did we decide to do? Well, we decided to take the frog out of its natural environment and kill it, dissect it, and learn about it. Well, does a dead frog act like a live frog? You'd have to be pretty crazy to think that that's true. So studying dead stuff doesn't mean that you're getting good answers for live stuff, simply put. um, even taking the frog, putting it in a box, a plastic box with artificial light for 18 hours of the day, the same color light, it's not the same. It's not the same. You need to look at things in its natural environment. Observation, that's key to life, but not to death. But this is a death cult. So uh, the modern science really looks at the study of effects, right? So it looks at the late stage of things, right? So, oh, well, you have heart disease. Well, your arteries are full of plaque, they're full of cholesterol. Okay, what was the cause of that? Well, it's cholesterol. There's cholesterol present. It's cholesterol. That's the cause. Okay, it doesn't make sense. They even admit that dietary cholesterol doesn't necessarily contribute to increased cholesterol. The argument could be dismantled so widely in so many different ways. Perhaps I shouldn't get into examples, but the study of effects, it's certainly the study of the effects, not the cause. They don't care about the cause, because when you address the root cause of things go away, right? So address the effect, address the symptom. Don't address the cause of the symptom. Address the symptom. Oh, you have a fever? Let's reduce your fever, right? Um, just because you get rid of the symptom doesn't mean that the cause has gone away. So they certainly look at the effects. It's the comfortable way of looking at things. It's the victimhood way of looking at things. It's the reductionist way of looking at things. Um, so another problem with the modern science is the cherry picking of studies. You can look at the literature. Here's the thing. You can look at the literature with any frame of mind, and you can prove your idea is correct. you can look at the literature with the terrain theory in mind, and you can prove it correctly. There are a lot of studies that indicate that the terrain model of health is true. You can look at studies that point towards the germ theory being true. You can look at studies say cholesterol is heart disease and cholesterol is not heart disease and animal products are heart disease and veganism is good for you and veganism is bad for you. You can look at the literature and come up with any answer. So really what the literature is it's polluted. It's terribly polluted. It's more polluted than our rivers and our oceans and our streets and everything, right? Streets are polluted. The asphalt is pollution. But still the literature is more polluted. And part of this is because of the peer review process. It's kind of a just a major echo chamber. Obviously, if you're doing a peer review and a study comes along that totally dismantles your way of life and all of your scientific work, well, you're certainly not going to agree with that and not say that that's the way, right? So, um, the peer review process is certainly flawed. It's just an echo chamber. That's the best way to describe it, right? You don't have objective people evaluating the logic and rationale of the studies. You have them more looking at the ideas of things. Um, and so obviously vested interests play a major role in the modern science. There's a lot of money involved. Studies don't get published, that they don't get the results that the funders anticipated or want, simply put. Uh, Modern science is politically based. You saw through the whole COVID fiasco, nothing but politics. It's absolute just a political mess. If you can't see that, I don't know what to tell you. It's all politics. Look at the you can look at both sides of the news. You can look at anything. It's all politically based. It all comes down to the vested interest. It all comes down to money. Always. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The demolition of the middle class. That's what it comes down to. Look at small businesses destroyed. You couldn't go into a small business, but you could sure go into a Costco or a Walmart or a Superstore. Anyways, I'll move on from that. Get the blood boiling a bit. Um, so one thing that modern science, some argue that they do well is diagnosing. Diagnosing is more like a sorcerer's spell, in my opinion. I think the worst thing, okay, well, this is arguable because you could say that the worst thing is if a doctor were to tell you that you have 3 months to live. Well, what happens is people have 3 months to live and they get caught in this spell of, oh, I have 3 months to live and I'm gonna die in 3 months. And if that's what you focus on, then you die in 3 months. Now you do have this group of people who get 3 months to live. They say, screw this, I'm gonna go live my life. I'm gonna live it to the fullest. I'm gonna quit my job. I'm gonna take all my money and go and travel and live in a van and backpack or hike up a mountain, do all this crazy stuff that they could only dream of doing their entire life, and then they beat cancer. It's very interesting. You hear these stories a lot, most often, all the time. So in that sense, diagnosing, is more like a blessing, but it depends on the person, right? It depends on the person. It depends on the situation. It would be a lot better to foster that idea that way rather than giving this diagnosing spell, right? So it's like um, John Morrow is his name, I believe. Modrow, John Modrow, um, How to Become a Schizophrenic, mentioned about talks a lot about schizophrenic and the case against biological psychiatry. Another phenomenal read, especially if you're in the psych field. Um, you know, Talks about how if you're treated as a schizophrenic, if you're treated as someone who's going to have a psychosis, well, it's likely that you'll have one, if not sure, if not certain. If you're treated as, a cancer patient, if you're treated as, someone with the disease, well, you get stuck in that, right? You get stuck in this mindset. And this is the part of the mentalism that I was talking about earlier, right? Do not do not tell yourself that you are this diseased person. Do not say, oh, I'm a depressed person, right? What do you think that's going to do for yourself? It's not going to do anything for yourself, right? Same as, don't identify with these complexes. It's not productive at all. Live your life as a human being. Uh, I'll mention this. I was listening to the Biggleson brothers. They were talking about their father, who Harvey Biggleson, Dr. Harvey Biggleson, absolutely phenomenal, phenomenal doctor, amazing, cured so many people. Now, one of his sons was talking about, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the Biggleson brothers. They were talking about how when their father would deal with these cancer patients, um, they'd come for a month time, and well, by the end of the month, they'd be cured of their cancer, of course, because this guy was a true doctor. And they would they would talk about, how how his father would say to the patient, okay, well, you're done. You're done. You don't need to receive anymore. Like, there's nothing left. And they say, okay, well, like, do I have to come back? Like, do I have to come back and have a checkup or do this? He's like, no, you're cancer free. And then they would say, well, what am I supposed to do with my life? I've been a cancer patient for the last how many years? What am I supposed to do? I'm a cancer patient. Well, what am I now? He says, just go live your life, do what you love. And these people have no clue what they'd love to do, and they have no clue what they want to do and how to live their life because they've over identified with this complex that they are something that they're not. They are this diseased entity that will hold you back like nothing else, right? So diagnostics, I don't know, you can just certainly in the modern framework, um, diagnosing somebody, perhaps keeping it in files would be a better way to do it, but like putting the spell on people and making people over identify with these complexes is not helpful to the individual at all. Um, telling someone that you know, they're this, they're bipolar, they're anxious, they're schizophrenic, it doesn't help the individual. Another problem is epidemiology. Uh, the reason it's problematic is because we draw theory and we draw conclusions from epidemiology when should only be used to generate hypotheses. Um, maybe that's right. But epidemiology, we take it really like this is where we get the correlation equals causation. We have done that so much through COVID. This has been like epidemiology really ran that ship. It's the most ridiculous thing. We fund it way too much. It should only be used to generate hypothesis. We need to test those things properly. We need to, have proper controls, which epidemiology certainly does not. It controls no variables. So, epidemiology is problematic only because of how we take the results, not problematic in essence, not problematic if done correctly. Um, and now, of course, we can talk about the benefits of modern science because it's not all bad. Obviously, technology is a very important advancement. Emergency medicine is phenomenal. It's the top of the line medicine. You break your arm, who are you going to go see? Emergency doctor. Well, if you're going to have a heart attack and you're going to die, it'd probably be good to go to an emerge room. Or if you're in sepsis even, right? So there's this balance and there's this need, right? Obviously, like avoiding these is the key, right? Don't, don't get to a point where you're going to go into sepsis. Don't get to the point where you're going to have a heart attack. That's the true medicine, right? If you get to that point and you're in immediate danger and you're going to die, go it's important to seek emergency medicine, which is the phenomenal aspect of it. But for general health, the modern medicine fields have certainly been failing. You can see that obviously in the West, where medicine receives the most funding in the world and has the most diseased population. Um, so yeah, modern deals with injuries very well. Injuries and emergency medicine is certainly where it's at. Technology helpful, you know, very helpful, causes a lot of problems, maybe more problems than not. But if used correctly, if used as a tool, if used correctly, it's beneficial, right? So, um, but finding that balance is hard. And, who wants to turn their Wi-Fi off at night? It's such a pain in the butt, but you got to do it, right? It's like, it's important. It's important. We shouldn't bathe in these electromagnetic frequencies all the time, constantly. So to continue here, like I have a little bit of a breakdown here. If you're viewing this on the video, if not, I'm gonna go over it verbally as well. Um, so kind of the way that we study things, and where things are grounded in nature and where things get easily corruptible, right? Because eh, these concepts kind of build on each other. So right at the base, you have mathematics and geometry, right? And built on that, you have physics. Built on that, you have chemistry. Built on that, you have biology. Built on that, you have psychology. And built on that, you have sociology. And as you go down the list, it becomes more easily corruptible because you get further and further away of what's grounded in nature. Not to say that there's no good psychological concepts, no good biological concepts, no good chemical concepts, or physical concepts. Not to say that there can't be truth. It's just that, in our modern framework, we think that we're correct in absolutely everything, which is an absolute arrogant statement, an arrogant idea, that we're correct about everything that we know about physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology. Now one thing that we pretty much have mastered is mathematics and geometry, right? Things like sacred geometry, numerology, measurement. These are all very rooted in nature. It's very observable. They're law-like, right? They occur all the time. Nothing, nothing gets in the way. Now physics, so a lot of neophysics is speculative, especially when you get into the space stuff, and even the quantum mechanics stuff. It's pretty abstract. It's kind of modern science's spirituality in a way. I originally connected to spirituality through quantum physics because I was certainly of the materialistic mindset, because that's what was ingrained in me since I was born, more so, not necessarily through my parental influence, but through societal influence. Um, you know, Things like physics, like, we study electricity, right? So you could study the bioelectricity of the body, and or quantum biology, right? And these are better fields, more rooted in nature, kind of get back more to the truth. And not to say that they are true or that any of these concepts are true or false, but it's just, you can see how it gets easily corruptible, right? So with chemistry, it's like, look at the model of the atom. Okay, well, how useful is that, right? Because we say that electrons can be in one place and in another place at the exact same time, right? So it not that it's necessarily problematic, but just that how useful really is it, right? When you look back at the physical theories, right, the physics of it, right, it kind of gets a little more speculative. That this is the model of the atom. This is where all of the electrons and protons should be, right? Um, next is biology. Materialistic biology is absolute garbage. We kind of touch on that a little bit. Um, when it's purely physical, it's just garbage. Quantum biology, I mentioned that, seems to be a better field, integrating physics and biology together. It's better. It's better. It seems to be better, at least. Again, not stating the validity of quantum biology, but it seems to be better, right? And things like, if you were to take Tom Cohen's new biology curriculum, I'm sure it's rooted in a lot of truth, and I'm sure because he's very rigorous with his studies and he does his due diligence. That's for sure. Or if you take the Biggleson brothers, study on microscopy, or um, sorry, I'm blank on the name of their program, but like these concepts, although more biological in nature, are certainly still more rooted in truth, right? So, um, and with psychology, like, I'm a Jungian guy. Like, I like Carl Jung's theories. Now, is there shortfalls? Absolutely. Things like Alderian theory are good as well, and uh, it's a difficult thing to study, right? So when you take a materialist approach to psychology, again, throw it out the window. It's absolute trash, garbage. Um, if you base psychology on the neurochemistry, right? That's very materialistic construct. It's terrible, absolutely terrible. You're gonna tell me that I can randomly develop this neurochemical imbalance and then just feel depressed all the time? It makes no sense. It's not even grounded in the literature. It's just foolish. And so another thing with psychology, perhaps there's no universal theories. I'm not really sure about this. Perhaps there is. Like, when you study the principle of mental, you study from an alchemical perspective, alchemical psychology, likely more grounded in nature and truth, but difficult. And sociology, I'm not even going to touch on that, right? I'm not even going to talk about that one. Not worth my time. Okay, let's talk about disease. Slightly, we're going to talk about a little bit what it is, what it isn't here. So disease, I like to describe it as the absence of light and distance from the source, right? As you get further and further away from nature, you tend to be more diseased, right? You tend to get more rooted in disease, and this is certainly problematic. Um, Pathogens do not exist in natural order. So, you know, nature is not out to get you. It's not out to kill you, you know? There's a beautiful balance in nature, right? And you may even say, "Oh, well, look at a predator. Look at like lions, like for an example, right? Lions. Well, they're out to kill you. No, they're not. Lions are where the prey are, right? They're part of this delicate balance of the ecosystem where lions are only present because of the prey, right? You're not going to see lions out in the desert where there's no food, where there's no, right? It doesn't happen, right? So there's this delicate balance in nature, same as, you know, you're walking through the woods and you see this dead carcass, this dead deer carcass. Well, you're going to see it covered in flies and maggots. No one's going to sit here and say, "Oh, well, the flies and the maggots killed um, this deer," right? It makes no sense. They're part of that delicate balance. They're the cleanup men. They're the garbage men, right? And so the garbage men analogy. Well, no one says that garbage men are the cause of garbage, even though they're always present around garbage. They're always there around garbage. Well, they're not the cause of garbage. And same as firefighters. Well, no one says firefighters are the cause of fires. It makes no sense, right? Although they're present at the cause or at the scene of fires all the time. So the analogy I'm pointing to here is that, microbes are not the cause of disease, although they're present at the site of disease. Uh, doesn't mean that they're the cause. They're there, part of the delicate balance of nature. They're there as the garbage men, the cleanup crew, part of this delicate system in the body of taking that garbage or dead or diseased tissue and breaking it down into something that can be built again, right? It's an alchemical transformation. Simple. Um, you know, Another idea is that disease does not exist, right? They're only self-correcting, self-healing processes in the body. That's very fundamental. Now, when we talk about things, we're going to talk about diseases, right? Because for linguistic purposes, it's a lot easier. Um, but you know, in its essence, diseases do not exist. They don't exist. It's not, you don't have a disease. You have your body underwent a trauma from an injury, deficiency, emotion, or contamination. Um, and it needs to be it needs to be cleaned up. It needs to heal, right? Self-correcting process. That's how we're going to think about disease. So cause of disease, right? My hypocrisy right there. Point that out, would you? Things like injuries, that's cause of disease. Cut yourself, get bit by a lion. That's a that's an injury, right? That's a cause of disease, right? This disease state. Um, Deficiencies. Now, what is essential is often argued. What are the essential nutrients of the body? This people go back and forth on. We'll talk about this a lot on the channel. Um, you know, you have essentially you have these two types of deficiencies. You have the organic or the inorganic compounds. Um, so you have your minerals and you have your macronutrients and you have, all of this stuff. Now importantly in this idea of deficiencies causing disease, I like to think of it more as a deficiency in nature or deficiency in sunlight, deficiency in love, deficiency in movement, happiness, or sleep also contribute to disease. It's not even argued. Another cause of disease could be emotion, unregulated emotion. New German medicine gets into this concept a lot. We'll have some experts come on and talk about that. Emotions like greed, gluttony, fear, stress, sadness also contribute to an ill state of the mind and thus the body. Um, so that certainly plays a role in the cause. Now, you can also have contaminations, biochemical contaminations, or electrochemical contaminations. So things like toxicities, heavy metals, glyphosate. Yeah, the list here is so extensive I can't even begin. Electrochemical things like artificial frequencies, um, non-native EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies. It's going to contribute to disease. It's simply going to contribute to the ill health of your body. Now we'll talk a little bit about what doesn't cause disease here. Symptoms are not the cause of disease. So fever is not the cause of disease. Inflammation is not the cause of disease. Swelling is not the cause of disease, right? You break your finger, well, it swells up and there's inflammation. Well, no one says the swelling or the inflammation caused the disease. It is there because you had an injury, you broke your finger, right? Simple explanation. It's no different. As above, so below. It's no different in the rest of the body. If you have a fever, it doesn't just occur randomly because you're having this fever. It serves a purpose. It serves a purpose. It serves a self-correcting, self-healing purpose. It's a process of the body. It's innate, right? So things like bugs don't cause these viruses, bacteria, fungus, parasites are all they're not at the cause of disease. Do they play a role in disease? Yes, they do. But they're not the cause of disease. You should not fear viruses, bacteria, fungus, or parasites. They're not going to cause disease. If you have a diseased environment, these are part of the self-correcting processes to help clean it up. So, you have to look at that, right? Um, what is at the root cause? Why are viruses present, right? Well, is the cell dying? Was the cell dying before the viruses were there? Probably. Are you in a state of disease, or is your environment, you know, dying inside because of toxicity or deficiency? Is that why the bacteria are present? Fungal states is a pretty late stage of disease according to pleomorphism. You could be pretty diseased to have fungal infection, right? um, infection being in in air quotes because infection's a fallacy. Same as parasites. You can consume parasites. I've seen people consume parasites online and they don't develop these parasites within them. Why? Because their guts are healthy, right? Have an unhealthy gut, eat a parasite, well, then maybe it'll stick around. You know, that's an idea. Hormonal imbalances are not the cause of disease. Neurochemical imbalances are not the cause of disease. We use that example a couple times. You're not depressed because you randomly developed this neurochemical imbalance. Well, maybe you had a contamination that caused the neurochemical imbalance that maybe makes you depressed, but still, it's not the neurochemical imbalances that cause you disease. And I'm not so sure about that either. But the environmental factors probably contribute to mental illnesses, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's the route that it takes. Another thing, antibodies don't cause disease. Now, this is the autoimmune idea. They say, oh, well, our body just randomly starts attacking itself. Well, I highly doubt that. They say, oh, well, it's genetic origin or it's viral origin. Again, I highly doubt that. I really do think that, you know, this is a major topic that we'll certainly get into more. But the antibody, you know, idea of being a cause of disease is just foolish to me. Um, you know, it makes no sense that you just randomly start attacking your pancreas when you're 16 years old. Well, maybe your immune system is not regulated right, wasn't developed right, wasn't nurtured correctly. Another thing, salt, sugar, cholesterol cause of disease. They're not the cause of disease. We've eaten salt for a very long time, we've eaten sugar for a very long time, and we've consumed cholesterol for a very, very long time. Um, Cholesterol is the fundamental building block for all of our hormones. To lower your cholesterol, increase all-cause mortality. A lot of studies point to that. We'll touch on this in the future podcast more specifically, but the cholesterol myth is just absolutely foolish. Good book, by the way. Um, but yeah, same as salt and sugar. Now, if you're going to consume processed sugar that's been bleached and treated with all these chemicals and preservatives and anti-caking agents, same as salt, that might contribute to disease. But is it the salt and the sugar, or is it the processing? Is it the additives? Is it the chemicals therein? Same as salt is not NaCl. It's not sodium chloride. Salt is, sea salt, Celtic sea salt. There's arguments against Himalayan salt, but probably not as detrimental as many people make it out to be. Another thing, genetics or heredity are not the cause of disease. Now, this excludes birth defects. Now, autoimmune diseases are not birth defects. Um, these are not the causes of disease. These are not at the basis of disease. Our genetics follow our energy. Our genetics follow our environment. Through the study of epigenetics, we're starting to learn this more and more and more, right? This even in the modern framework starting can't deny it. Our environment depicts our genes. Well, you live in a bad environment and you get disease. Well, it's likely that your parents lived in that environment and their parents as well, right? But go back 15 generations and they didn't live in the same environment. They lived in a little farm out in the middle of nowhere and didn't have any of this disease. And Weston Price's book really highlights this very, very well that even a native who consumes a modern diet who as a child may have all of these deformalities in their face and their teeth, right? And poor jaw structure. But if that child grows up with even with the deformed face and consumes a native diet, their children will have perfectly straight teeth, perfect, in perfect condition. Depends on the individual. Yeah, so birth defects definitely do depend on the parent, on the parents. Both of them contribute significantly. Are certainly, other than that, not the cause of disease. Okay, we're going to touch briefly on the role of the body. We're getting time here, but I'll touch on this briefly. So the body's not something to blame, right? So, we're not taking the victim body, the victimhood of the body. We're not taking this, we're taking responsibility, right? We're not going to blame the body. We're not going to say, oh, what's this? Or we're not going to blame nature. We're not going to blame any of this stuff, right? Um, Now, there's a certain interconnectedness to everything in nature, right? Everything lives in accordance with each other, right? We've developed in accordance with each other. We are living in accordance with each other. Mind, body, and spirit are all connected. They're all equally important. You can't have one without the other two. Can't have two without one. You gotta have them all. If you want to optimize, you gotta have them all. Um, we'll touch on German New Medicine. This highlights the role of emotion in the and disease, like the connectedness of the psyche and the body very well. And we'll have experts come on and talk about that. We touched briefly on neuroplasticity and epigenetics. This is modern. This is you know, the modern science coming up to disprove itself, right? It creates a lot of problems in the theories. Yeah. So then, obviously we have the mental plane and the role that it plays. The principle of mentalism that every action is a sustained thought before it occurs. There's always a thought before something is manifested. Um, so the role of the psyche, consciousness, our ego. I do want to do a podcast on the psyche and the constructs and maybe look at the history a little bit. That will likely come down the road. I'll have some people come in and talk about it too. Um, but yeah, our ego, our ability to understand and manipulate the world around us is kind of the difference from the animal world. Like we're very social beings. It's kind of a major difference, right? Um, and we'll talk, but this gets more into the philosophy of things as well, right? So our consciousness, very important because everything's conscious, right? So it's kind of a level of consciousness that's different from the animal world. Uh, but certainly through this understanding and manipulation, it's caused a lot of problems. For humans. And like I said, I'm a Jungian guy, like Carl Jung. I certainly don't take his work as dogmatism, but he was so concerned with not becoming dogmatic that it really resonates with me because he's not out here trying to reduce symptoms. That's why I like the Jungian interventions. He likes to address the underlying causes of things, the complexes, the personal, or the archetypes in the collective. Um, he proposed the structure of the psyche that could be certainly debatable, but that we have this ego or this consciousness, and then you have the unconscious. You could relate it well to order and chaos, or potential, um, or unknown and known. Um, so he does break it down nicely, and he was certainly a learned man and well researched. And his ideas of shadow work or complex work, kind of does address this kind of one of the interventions in addressing underlying causes of things of our mental states, and definitely highlights the necessity of complexes in our lives. That complexes aren't necessarily bad. We have well adapted complexes or maladaptive complexes, and those are the ones that need to be addressed. Um, but yeah, another thing that I like is the personality types that's kind of derived from the Jungian idea. I like the way that Linda Behrens, John Beebe, and Isabel Myers have developed the concept of personality types, the 16 personality types. It's good. It's again, we're not going to take it as dogma. It seems to be rooted in human nature, at least. Don't take the Myers-Briggs test. It's garbage. It doesn't it doesn't consider cognitive functions at all. It doesn't consider true Jungian psychology. Often it mistypes people and puts people in boxes. It doesn't overly consider the four sides of the mind either. And yeah, like these personality types, like according to these three, are slightly different than the Jungian ones. He had eight, but it builds upon the idea and kind of takes in Plato's idea of temperaments, and you cross it with the types, with the Jungian types, and it comes to 16. So, and we'll touch on this more in the psych podcast that I do, or maybe some experts. We'll get some experts in talking about it. I think that'd be pretty cool too. So the next podcast, we're gonna do a Rise of the Germ. It's gonna be the history of the germ theory, how it came about, problems with it, and you know, we're gonna talk a little bit about what we're against here, and like I don't necessarily like doing that, um, but you know, we kind of have to at this point, um, kind of set a basis, right? So we're like, it's my hypocrite episode, right? So we're gonna do that one next. It's gonna be good. It's great. We're still gonna touch on train concepts and the fallacies there, and so it is important to know, like especially if you're gonna consider arguing with people over this, which is a waste of energy, but many people love to argue. The next podcast, Follow the Germ. This is going to be the history of the terrain theory, and we're going to kind of go over the terrain model of health. I'm gonna try and really put all my ideas together and into one um, PowerPoint. Really present everything that I've learned so far about it in the most concise, clear way possible. Um, and Yeah, I think that will be good. And then the next podcast, hopefully we'll get some guests on. If anyone agrees to come on, I'm sure we can find someone. All right, and we're gonna have a little disclaimer here at the end. So the government, scientific, and medicine establishments are completely controlled and intertwined by vested interests. These establishments and all those invested, of course, have control over the media, school systems, university, etc. All school of thought outside the mainstream view is punished and viewed as quackery and pseudoscience, likely this whole podcast. For these reasons, to cover myself legally, I'm obliged to say that I am not a medical doctor, and nothing ever stated in this podcast or my life in general should ever be taken as medical advice. This podcast and everything I ever say therein is for informational purposes only. We should all keep in mind that we're all responsible, sovereign beings capable of thinking, criticizing, and understanding anything. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone put you down. You are enough. You are capable. You can do it. Take some responsibility. We, the people in the greater forces, are together self healers, self governable, self teachers, and so much more. Please reach out if you have any questions, comments, or criticism. You can reach me at beyond.terrain on Instagram. I'll put that in the show notes below. And listen, I truly appreciate every single person that took the time to listen to this podcast today. If you enjoyed this podcast or found it informative in any way, please like, share, comment, support me, and help me grow. I know the algorithm's working against me, so we got to fight that thing. Uh, Remember, there are two types of people in this world: those who believe they can, those who believe they can't, both of which are correct. Thanks for listening. Take care.